I never thought I would become the kind of person who measures snow piles in the middle of a February cold snap. But when Barbara Henderson from the HOA sent me that threatening letter about my supposedly oversized snow mound, something inside me snapped like an icicle off a frozen gutter. It started on a Tuesday morning when I was scraping ice off my windshield, already running late for my shift at the automotive repair shop I managed in Rochester, New York. The mailman, Eddie, walked up my driveway with an apologetic look on his weathered face that immediately put me on edge. "Kyle, you got certified mail from the association," he said, handing me the thick envelope with obvious reluctance. "Sorry, buddy. These never mean anything good." I signed for it with my frozen fingers, already dreading what was inside. Eddie was right to be apologetic. The moment I tore open that envelope and saw the HOA letterhead with Barbara Henderson's name printed in bold letters beneath the title of president, my blood pressure spiked despite the 10-degree weather. The letter was 3 pages long, filled with citations to obscure sections of the Maple Ridge Estate's homeowners association bylaws that I would have needed a law degree to understand fully. But the main point was crystal clear. My snow pile, the one I had created by diligently shoveling my driveway after every storm this brutal winter, was allegedly in violation of Section 12.4.7 of the Community Guidelines, which stated that accumulated snow removal debris shall not exceed 4 feet in height or extend beyond property boundaries. 4 feet. They were threatening me over 4 feet of snow height. The letter went on to inform me that I had 7 days to remedy the situation or face a fine of $250, with additional daily fines of $50 if I remained non-compliant. Barbara had even included grainy photographs taken from the street, showing my admittedly substantial snow pile at the edge of my driveway. I stood there in the freezing cold, reading and rereading that letter while my car continued to idle in the driveway. This was insane. We had gotten 38 inches of snow in the past 3 weeks alone. Where exactly did Barbara expect me to put all that snow? Was I supposed to melt it with a flamethrower? Truck it to Canada? My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant manager, Derek, asking where I was. I shoved the letter into my coat pocket and drove to work, fuming the entire way. The unfairness of it gnawed at me throughout the day as I diagnosed a faulty transmission and helped a customer understand why their brake pads needed replacing. When I got home that evening, I walked directly to the snow pile in question. I had created it methodically over the past month, pushing and shoveling snow from my driveway and walkway to this corner of my property, right at the edge where my lot met the sidewalk. It was big, sure, but it was on my property, and it was not blocking anything except the view of my neighbor's recycling bins. I pulled out my phone and took my own photographs, documenting the pile from multiple angles. Then, because I am nothing if not thorough when I am angry, I went into my garage and found my old measuring tape, the 25-foot one I used for home improvement projects. The snow pile measured 3 feet and 11 inches at its highest point. I stood there in the dimming twilight, staring at that measurement, feeling vindication and rage mixing in equal proportions. They had threatened me over a snow pile that did not even violate their ridiculous rule. It was under 4 feet. Barbara Henderson had sent me a threatening letter, complete with fines and deadlines, over something that was not even a violation. That night, I drafted a response letter. I kept it professional, though it took 4 attempts to remove all the sarcasm and anger from my tone. I cited the exact measurement, attached my own photographs with a ruler visible for scale, and politely requested that the HOA withdraw their complaint and remove any record of violation from my file. I sent it certified mail the next morning. 3 days later, I received another letter. This one was shorter, but somehow more infuriating. Barbara acknowledged my measurement, but claimed that snow pile dimensions are subject to settling and remeasurement, and that the HOA board has determined that your snow accumulation presents an aesthetic concern to the community, regardless of technical height compliance. She generously offered to reduce my fine to $100 if I removed the pile within 3 days. I called my buddy Marcus that night. Marcus worked as a paralegal at a downtown firm and had dealt with his own share of HOA nonsense when he lived in the suburbs. "They are just moving the goalposts," Marcus said over the phone, his voice heavy with sympathy. "First it is about the rules. Then when you prove you are not breaking the rules, suddenly it is about aesthetics or community standards or some other vague nonsense they can interpret however they want." "So what do I do?" I asked, pacing my living room while staring out at the offending snow pile through my front window. "You have 2 choices. Pay the fine and let them win, teaching them they can bully you whenever they want. Or you fight back, which is going to be time-consuming and potentially expensive if you need to lawyer up." "There has to be a third option," I said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Well, you could go on the offensive. HOAs love to enforce rules on everyone else, but they are notoriously bad at following those same rules themselves. If you can catch them in a violation, especially the board members, you have leverage." That conversation planted a seed in my mind that grew rapidly over the next 24 hours. Saturday morning dawned clear and bitterly cold, the kind of day where the sun shines brilliantly, but provides absolutely no warmth. I bundled up in my heaviest winter gear, grabbed my measuring tape, my phone, a notebook, and a thermos of coffee, and set out on what my girlfriend would later call my revenge reconnaissance mission. Jennifer had stayed over Friday night, and she watched me prepare for my expedition with a mixture of amusement and concern. "You are really going to measure other people's snow piles?" she asked, sipping her coffee at my kitchen table. "Not other people's," I corrected. "The HOA board members. If Barbara wants to enforce rules, she better be following them herself." Jennifer shook her head, but she was grinning. "You are kind of terrifying when you get focused on something, you know that." I kissed her forehead. "That is why you love me." "That is definitely not why, but okay, Snow Warrior. Go forth and measure." I started with Barbara Henderson's house, because of course I did. She lived 4 streets over in one of the larger homes in Maple Ridge Estates, a colonial-style house with black shutters and a 3-car garage. The irony of her living in one of the biggest houses while complaining about my modest snow pile was not lost on me. As I approached her property, I tried to look casual, like I was just a guy taking a winter morning walk. But my eyes were scanning her front yard with the intensity of a detective at a crime scene. And there it was. Oh, there it was. Barbara's snow pile was massive. She had clearly hired a snow removal service because the pile was professionally pushed to the corner of her lot, where her driveway met the street. But professional did not mean compliant. I glanced around to make sure no one was watching too closely, then walked up as if I was just admiring the neighborhood. I pulled out my measuring tape and, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible, measured the height of Barbara's snow pile. 5 feet, 7 inches. I had to measure it twice because I could not believe it. Barbara Henderson, the woman who had threatened me with fines over a snow pile that was not even violation height, had a snow pile that exceeded the 4-foot limit by 19 inches. I took photographs from multiple angles, making sure to capture the measurements clearly. I documented the address, the date, the time, everything that would be needed for an official complaint. But I was not done. Over the next 3 hours, I systematically visited the homes of all 5 members of the HOA board. I had their addresses from the community directory that had been mailed out last fall, back when I had briefly considered getting involved in the association, before deciding I valued my sanity too much. The vice president, Linda Kowalski, had a snow pile measuring 4 feet and 8 inches. The treasurer, Robert Walsh, had 2 piles, one at 4 feet 3 inches and another at a whopping 5 feet 2 inches. The secretary, Donna Price, apparently did not believe in making piles at all and had simply shoveled her snow into her flower beds and bushes, which violated a completely different section of the bylaws about protecting landscaping. Only one board member, a younger guy named Tom Brennan, who served as the member at large, had a compliant snow pile. His measured 3 feet 8 inches, and his property was generally well maintained and sensible. I made a note that he seemed like the only reasonable person on the entire board. By the time I got home, my face was numb from the cold, but I was energized in a way I had not felt in months. I spread all my documentation out on my dining room table: photographs, measurements, addresses, timestamps. It was comprehensive. It was damning. Jennifer came over that afternoon and found me surrounded by papers, typing furiously on my laptop. "Oh no," she said, taking in the scene. "You have gone full detective mode." "Look at this," I said, turning my laptop around to show her the spreadsheet I had created. "Every single board member except one is in violation of the same rule they are trying to enforce on me. Barbara's pile is almost 2 feet over the limit." Jennifer studied the screen, her expression shifting from amused to impressed. "Okay, that is pretty hypocritical. What are you going to do with all this?" "I am going to file a formal complaint with the HOA about each board member's violations," I said. "Let them deal with their own bureaucracy. And you think that will work? They are not going to find themselves." She had a point. I sat back in my chair, thinking. Then I need to escalate it beyond the HOA. That is when I remembered something my neighbor, old Mr. Patterson, had mentioned a few months back. He had complained about someone building a shed without proper permits, and the town had gotten involved. The town of Brighton, which encompassed our development, had its own codes and regulations that superseded HOA rules. I spent the rest of Saturday evening researching Brighton's municipal codes. What I found was interesting. The town had regulations about snow removal that were related to public safety, specifically about snow blocking sidewalks, sight lines at intersections, and drainage issues. But there was also a section about residential property maintenance that gave the town's code enforcement office authority to investigate complaints about property violations that could affect public infrastructure. More importantly, I discovered that HOA common areas and properties were subject to the same town inspections as any other property. And the HOA of Maple Ridge Estates owned several common areas: the entrance with its brick sign and landscaping, a small park with a gazebo, and a retention pond that handled storm water drainage. Monday morning, I called in a personal day at work and drove to Brighton Town Hall. The Code Enforcement Office was on the 2nd floor, a cramped space with filing cabinets lining the walls and the smell of old coffee permeating everything. The woman at the front desk looked up from her computer with the expression of someone who had already dealt with too many complaints that morning, and it was only 9:30. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I would like to file a property maintenance complaint," I said, trying to sound official and reasonable. "I have documented violations of snow removal codes and potential drainage issues." Her expression shifted to something more engaged. Snow and drainage were apparently taken seriously in Brighton, especially after a few basements had flooded in the area last spring. "Fill out this form," she said, handing me a clipboard. "Be specific about locations and violations. If you have photo documentation, that helps." I filled out the form meticulously, listing each board member's address and the specific measurements of their non-compliant snow piles. But I also added something else. I reported that the HOA's retention pond area had excessive snow accumulation that might affect spring drainage, and that the entrance area's snow had been piled in a way that obscured the stop sign at the corner of Maple Ridge Drive and Oakmont Street. That last part was not petty revenge. It was legitimately true. I had noticed it while doing my reconnaissance, and it was actually dangerous. The desk clerk reviewed my form and photos. "This is very thorough," she said, sounding surprised. "Most people just scribble an address and say something is ugly." "I believe in documentation," I replied. "Well, someone will be out to investigate within 5 business days. You will receive a follow-up letter about what actions, if any, are taken." I thanked her and left, feeling both triumphant and slightly guilty. The triumph won out. That evening, I received a phone call from an unknown local number. I almost did not answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Kyle Crawford," a woman's voice asked, speaking. "This is Barbara Henderson from the Maple Ridge Estates HOA. I am calling about your continued non-compliance with our snow removal directive." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Barbara, as I documented in my response letter, my snow pile is 3 feet 11 inches tall, which is under your 4-foot limit. I am in full compliance. As I explained, we have determined that your snow accumulation is an aesthetic concern. The rule about 4 feet is a maximum allowance, not a requirement. We can still require removal if it presents issues." "What specific issue does it present?" I asked. "It is not blocking the sidewalk. It is not blocking sight lines. It is entirely on my property." "What is the actual problem?" "The problem, Kyle, is that you are being difficult. This is a community, and we all need to work together to maintain standards." My temper flared. "Standards? I measured your snow pile, Barbara. It is 5 feet 7 inches tall. That is 19 inches over your own limit. If you want to talk about standards, maybe start with yourself." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Barbara spoke again, her voice had gone from condescending to icy. "Are you threatening me?" "I am not threatening anyone. I am pointing out that if you are going to enforce rules, those rules should apply equally to everyone, including the board members. I will be recommending to the board that we proceed with the maximum fines allowed," Barbara said. "You will be receiving formal notice shortly." She hung up before I could respond. Jennifer, who had been listening to my side of the conversation from the couch, raised her eyebrows. "That went well." "She is going to push this," I said, feeling a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. "She is actually going to try to fine me even though I am in compliance." "Can she do that?" "I have no idea. I guess I will find out." Wednesday afternoon, I received another certified letter. This one informed me that I had been fined $250 for failure to maintain community aesthetic standards, and that I had 10 days to pay or face additional penalties, including potential liens against my property. I read that last part twice. A lien. They were threatening to put a lien on my house over a 3 foot 11-inch snow pile that was not even violating their rules. I immediately called Marcus. "They cannot just make up violations, can they?" I asked after explaining the situation. "Unfortunately, HOAs have pretty broad discretionary powers," Marcus said. "If their bylaws have vague language about aesthetics or community standards, they can interpret that however they want." You would have to challenge it, probably in court, which means lawyer fees that would likely exceed the fine. So they just win. They can bully people into paying fines for non-violations because fighting back is too expensive. "Welcome to the nightmare of HOA governance," Marcus said sympathetically. "But look, you said you filed a complaint with the town, right? Wait and see what comes of that. If the town finds violations, especially by board members, you might have leverage to get your fine dismissed." The HOA does not want public attention on their hypocrisy. I decided to wait. It was probably the most stressful week of my life. Every day I expected another letter, another escalation. I found myself checking my mailbox with the kind of dread usually reserved for medical test results. Friday afternoon, while I was at work, I got a call from Jennifer. "There is a town truck parked in front of Barbara's house," she said. She had driven through Maple Ridge on her way home from her job at the hospital. "It says code enforcement on the side." Seriously. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Seriously. There is a guy with a clipboard taking pictures. Barbara is standing on her front porch looking like she is about to explode. "I wish I could see that," I said. "I took a picture for you," Jennifer said, and I could hear the grin in her voice. "You have turned me into your partner in petty revenge." "It is not petty if they are actually violating codes," I protested, but I was smiling. That evening, I received a voicemail from Brighton Code Enforcement. The inspector, a man named Harold Chen, informed me that they had investigated my complaint and found multiple violations. He requested that I call him back to discuss the findings. I called him immediately. "Mr. Crawford, thank you for that detailed report," Harold said. He had a deep, professional voice. "We found that several properties you listed do indeed have snow accumulation exceeding safe and reasonable levels. More concerning, we found that the retention pond area managed by your HOA has significant snow and ice accumulation that could interfere with spring drainage, potentially causing flooding issues." "So, what happens now?" I asked. "We have issued citations to the individual property owners requiring remediation within 72 hours. As for the HOA, they are required to clear the retention pond area and the entrance area within 48 hours or face daily fines of $500. $500 per day." I tried not to sound too pleased. "That seems serious." "Storm water management is serious, Mr. Crawford. We had significant flooding last year because of drainage issues. The town is not taking chances this winter." After I hung up, I allowed myself a moment of pure vindication. Then I started worrying about retaliation. Barbara was not the type to take this quietly. I was right to worry. Saturday morning, I woke up to find a notice taped to my front door. The HOA was calling an emergency board meeting to discuss recent escalation of member conflicts and potential suspension of member privileges. The meeting was scheduled for Monday evening, and my name was specifically mentioned as a topic of discussion. Jennifer read the notice and shook her head. "They are going to try to make an example of you." "Let them try," I said, though I felt less confident than I sounded. "I am going to that meeting and I am going to bring every bit of documentation I have." "Want backup?" Jennifer asked. "You do not have to get dragged into this." "Kyle, you have been stressed for 2 weeks over this nonsense. I am coming. Besides, I want to see Barbara's face when you call her out in front of everyone." I loved this woman. Monday evening was sleeting, one of those miserable late winter nights where everything is gray and wet and cold. Jennifer and I drove to the community clubhouse, where HOA meetings were held. It was a small building near the neighborhood entrance, mostly used for the annual holiday party and occasional wedding receptions. When we arrived, the parking lot was surprisingly full. Apparently, Word had spread about the meeting, and other residents wanted to see what the drama was about. Inside, the main room had been set up with chairs facing a long table where the 5 board members sat. Barbara was in the center, flanked by Linda and Robert on one side, Donna and Tom on the other. She looked furious. The room was packed with at least 40 residents. I recognized many faces from around the neighborhood, though I had never spoken to most of them beyond polite waves. Jennifer and I found seats near the back. I clutched my folder of documentation like a security blanket. Barbara called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel. "We have called this emergency meeting to address a serious matter affecting our community," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "We have a resident who has repeatedly refused to comply with our community standards and has taken it upon himself to harass board members and interfere with HOA governance." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. My face heated up despite my determination to stay calm. "Kyle Crawford has been issued multiple notices about violations on his property," Barbara continued. "Instead of complying, he has filed frivolous complaints against board members and wasted town resources with false reports to code enforcement." I started to stand, but Jennifer put a hand on my arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Let her finish. Let everyone hear how unreasonable she sounds." Barbara went on for another 5 minutes, painting me as a troublemaker who was disrupting the harmony of Maple Ridge Estates. She proposed that I be fined an additional $500 for harassment of board members, and that I be banned from using community facilities for 6 months. When she finally finished, she looked directly at me. "Mr. Crawford, would you like to respond?" I stood up, my folder in hand. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady. "Yes, I would." I walked to the front of the room, very aware of everyone watching. "I want to make sure I understand this correctly. I am being accused of harassment and frivolous complaints. Let me walk everyone through what actually happened." I opened my folder and pulled out the first letter. 3 weeks ago, I received a certified letter from the HOA claiming my snow pile violated the 4-foot height limit. I measured my snow pile. It was 3 feet 11 inches. I documented this with photographs and measurements, and I sent a response proving I was in compliance. I held up the photos so people could see the ruler clearly visible in the images. Instead of acknowledging their mistake, I received another letter claiming my snow pile was an aesthetic concern and demanding I remove it or pay fines. A snow pile that was not violating any rules during a winter when we have had record snowfall. I could see people nodding around the room. Everyone had been dealing with the excessive snow this year. So I decided to check whether the board members were following their own rules, I continued. I measured the snow piles at each board member's home. "Barbara, your snow pile measured 5 feet 7 inches. That is 19 inches over the limit you were trying to enforce on me." Barbara's face went bright red. "That is completely inappropriate. You trespassed on my property." "I measured from the public sidewalk, which is not trespassing." "Linda, your pile was 4 feet 8 inches. "Robert, your 2 piles measured 4 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 2 inches. You were all in violation of your own rules while threatening to fine me for being in compliance." The room erupted in murmurs. I could see shock and anger on many faces, but it seemed to be directed at the board, not at me. Robert Walsh stood up. "This is ridiculous. We are board members. We are trying to maintain community standards. Minor variations in snow pile height during an extreme winter are not the same as blatant disregard for rules." "Then why was I being fined for a pile that was under the limit?" I shot back. "If minor variations are acceptable, why threaten me at all?" "Because your attitude has been the problem from the start," Barbara snapped. "You are difficult, you are argumentative, and you clearly do not respect the authority of this board." "I respect rules that are applied fairly," I said. "What I do not respect is hypocrisy." An older man in the front row raised his hand. I recognized him as George Martinez, a retired teacher who had lived in Maple Ridge since the development was built 20 years ago. "I have a question for the board," George said. "Were any of you aware that you were in violation of the snow pile rule when you sent Kyle this letter?" The board members looked at each other. Linda spoke up. "We do not measure our own snow piles. We trust that board members are making good faith efforts to comply." "But you did not trust Kyle to be making a good faith effort," George pressed. "You measured his pile, photographed it, and threatened him with fines before he ever had a chance to explain or remedy anything." "That is different," Barbara said, but she sounded less certain now. "How is it different?" Another voice called out. I turned and saw a young woman standing up. "I got a letter last month about my holiday decorations being up too late. They threatened to fine me even though I was dealing with my mother being in the hospital." "This board does not care about good faith. They care about power." More voices joined in, sharing their own stories of overzealous enforcement and threatened fines. I realized that my situation was not unique. The board, and Barbara in particular, had been ruling Maple Ridge estates with an iron fist, and people were tired of it. Tom Brennan, the youngest board member, held up his hands. "Can we all calm down? Look, I think there has been a failure of communication here. Kyle, I think your snow pile was fine. I think this whole thing got blown out of proportion. Barbara, maybe we need to reconsider how we approach violations. A warning or a friendly conversation before jumping to fines and threats." "We do not need to reconsider anything," Barbara said sharply. "We follow the bylaws as written. If people do not like it, they can run for the board themselves." "Maybe we will," someone shouted, and there was a rumble of agreement. Jennifer leaned over to whisper to the woman next to her, and suddenly there was a ripple of conversation spreading through the room. I was not sure what was happening, but it felt like something shifting. George Martinez stood up again. "I would like to make a motion. According to our bylaws, a special election can be called if 20% of homeowners sign a petition requesting it. I move that we circulate such a petition to recall the current board and hold new elections." The room erupted in applause and shouting. Barbara banged her gavel repeatedly, her face now purple with rage. "That is out of order. This is not a general meeting, it is an emergency board meeting. You cannot make motions." "Actually," Tom said quietly, flipping through a copy of the bylaws, "residents can make motions at any official HOA meeting where a quorum of homeowners is present. We definitely have a quorum." Barbara glared at him. "You are supposed to be supporting the board." "I am supporting the community," Tom replied. "And I think this board has lost sight of what that means." The next hour was chaotic. George's motion was seconded and discussed. Several residents volunteered to help circulate the recall petition. The board tried repeatedly to regain control of the meeting, but they had lost the room. Finally, Robert Walsh, looking exhausted, made his own motion. "I move that we table all pending fines and violations until after a full review of enforcement procedures by an independent third party." It was clearly an attempt to save face and prevent the recall, but I did not care. I just wanted this nightmare to end. The motion passed with support from Tom, and reluctantly, the other board members except Barbara, who voted against it with a scowl. Jennifer and I left the meeting an hour later, stepping out into the cold night air. The sleet had stopped and stars were visible between the clouds. "That was intense," Jennifer said. "That was insane," I corrected. "Did that really just happen?" You just started a revolution over a snow pile, she said, laughing. That is very on brand for you. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved quickly. George Martinez and his volunteers collected signatures for the recall petition. They needed 20% of homeowners, which meant 84 signatures out of Maple Ridge's 420 homes. They got 137 signatures in 5 days. The recall election was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, the board was supposed to be in a holding pattern, conducting only essential business. But Barbara Henderson did not do holding patterns. 10 days after the explosive meeting, I got a call from Harold Chen at Code Enforcement. "Mr. Crawford, I wanted to give you a heads up about something," he said. "We received a report that you are running an illegal business out of your home." My stomach dropped. "What? I do not run any business from my home." "The complaint claims you are operating an automotive repair service and that there are excessive vehicles and commercial activity at your residence." I closed my eyes, understanding immediately. "Let me guess. The complaint came from Barbara Henderson." "I cannot confirm who filed the report," Harold said carefully, "but I am required to investigate. Can I come by your property tomorrow morning?" "Of course. I have nothing to hide." Harold arrived at 9 the next morning. He was a stocky man in his 50s, wearing a heavy coat and carrying a tablet for taking notes. I walked him around my property. I showed him my garage, which contained my personal truck and my tools. I explained that I was a manager at an automotive repair shop, not the owner, and that I did not bring work home. "What about this?" Harold asked, pointing to my neighbor's old sedan that was parked on the street in front of my house. "That is my neighbor Mr. Patterson's car. He parks it there sometimes because his driveway is full with his RV. It is on the public street, not my property." Harold made notes. "And you have never repaired vehicles for money at this location?" "Never. I work at Precision Auto on Jefferson Avenue. Everything is done there." Harold looked around my tidy property, my single personal vehicle, my lack of commercial equipment. "Yeah, this is clearly a bogus complaint. I will file my report. Sorry you had to deal with this." "It is not your fault," I said. "It is retaliation, off the record," Harold said. "I have dealt with this HOA before. They filed 3 complaints last year against a family that beat them in a lawsuit over a fence. All 3 complaints were frivolous. They are bullies." After Harold left, I called Marcus. "She is retaliating by filing false reports," I explained. "What can I do about this?" "Document everything," Marcus said. "If she keeps filing false reports, that could be harassment. But honestly, Kyle, just wait out the election. Once she is off the board, this all goes away." I wanted to believe that, but I had a feeling Barbara was not done. I was right. 3 days later, Jennifer called me at work, her voice tight with stress. "Kyle, there are police at your house." "What? Why?" "I do not know. I was driving by on my way to work and I saw 2 police cars in your driveway. I pulled over and asked what was going on. They said they received a report of stolen property at your residence." I told Derek I had an emergency and drove home at probably illegal speeds. When I arrived, 2 Brighton police officers were standing in my driveway and my front door was open. My house had been searched. "What is going on?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice calm. The older officer, whose name tag Reed Morrison, consulted his notes. "Are you Kyle Crawford?" "Yes, this is my house." "Why was it searched?" "We received a report that you had stolen automotive parts and equipment stored here. We executed a search warrant." "A search warrant for what? I have not stolen anything." The younger officer, Torres, looked sympathetic. "We did not find any stolen property, Mr. Crawford. Everything checked out, but we had to investigate the report." "Who filed the report?" I asked, though I already knew. "I cannot disclose that information," Morrison said, "but the report claimed you had taken parts and tools from your employer without permission." My blood ran cold. "Did you contact my employer?" "We did. We spoke to the owner, who confirmed you are a trusted employee and that all inventory is accounted for. He said this was clearly a malicious report." I felt sick. Barbara had gone so far as to try to get me in trouble with the police and my employer. This was beyond HOA pettiness. This was a deliberate attempt to ruin my life. "Officer Morrison," I said carefully, "I know who filed this report. I am involved in a dispute with my HOA president, Barbara Henderson. She has been retaliating against me for filing legitimate code violations against her. This is the second false report she has filed in the past week." Morrison and Torres exchanged glances. "If you believe someone is filing false police reports, you can file a complaint," Morrison said. "I will. But can you tell me, is filing a false police report a crime?" "Yes, it is a misdemeanor in New York. If we determine that someone knowingly filed a false report, they can be charged." After the police left, I sat in my living room, looking at my house that had been searched by strangers. My neighbors had definitely seen the police cars. There would be gossip. Even though nothing was found, the suspicion would linger. Barbara had crossed a line. I called Marcus again, and this time he did not tell me to just wait it out. "File a police report about harassment," he said immediately. "Document every retaliation. The code enforcement complaint, the fake illegal business report, the stolen property report. Establish a pattern. And Kyle, you might want to talk to a lawyer about a restraining order. Against an HOA president, against a person who is harassing you. The fact that she is the HOA president does not give her the right to file false reports or try to ruin your reputation." I spent that evening writing out a detailed timeline of everything that had happened. Every letter, every conversation, every retaliation. Jennifer helped, adding details I had forgotten. The next morning, I went to the police station and filed a harassment complaint. The officer who took my report was professional but not particularly optimistic. "These HOA disputes rarely rise to the level of criminal harassment," he explained. "But with the false reports, especially the stolen property one, that is more serious. We will investigate." "What does that mean?" "It means we will interview the person who filed the report and determine if they knowingly made false statements. If they did, we can press charges." I also called a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Gomez who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. She agreed to meet with me that afternoon. Patricia's office was downtown, in an old building with creaky floors and walls lined with law books. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I laid out everything for her. The original snow pile complaint, my measurements proving compliance, Barbara's violations, the town investigation, the retaliation, the false reports. Patricia took notes and occasionally asked clarifying questions. When I finished, she sat back and steepled her fingers. "This is a fairly clear case of harassment and abuse of authority," she said. "The false police reports are particularly concerning. That crosses from petty HOA nonsense into potentially criminal behavior. So what can I do?" "Several things. First, we file for a restraining order. We have enough documented harassment to support it. Second, we send a cease and desist letter to the HOA board, making it clear that any further retaliation will result in a lawsuit. Third, we can file a civil suit for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." "How much is this going to cost me?" I asked. Patricia quoted me her rates. It was not cheap, but it was not outrageous either. "However," she added, "if we file suit and win, we can seek to recover attorney fees from the HOA. And honestly, given how egregious this behavior is, I think we have a strong case. I thought about my savings account. I thought about the principle of the thing. I thought about Barbara continuing to bully other residents if she was not stopped. "Let us do it," I said. "All of it." Things escalated quickly after that. Patricia filed for an emergency restraining order, which required a hearing in front of a judge. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I got a call from someone I did not expect. Tom Brennan, the reasonable board member. "Kyle, I want you to know that I am resigning from the board effective immediately," he said. "I cannot be part of what Barbara is doing. She is out of control." "What is happening on the board?" I asked. Tom sighed heavily. "She is obsessed with you. Every meeting, every conversation, it is about how you disrespected her and how you need to be taught a lesson. Linda and Robert just go along with whatever she says because they have been friends for years. Donna is starting to have doubts, but she would not stand up to Barbara. I tried to be a voice of reason, but nobody listens. Do they know she filed false police reports? If they do, they are turning a blind eye. Kyle, be careful. I do not think Barbara is done. She is talking about filing some kind of lawsuit against you for defamation or something. It does not make sense, but she is convinced she is the victim here." After Tom hung up, I felt a deep weariness. This had spiraled so far beyond a snow pile. This was about power and pride and someone who could not stand to be challenged. The restraining order hearing was held in Brighton Town Court on a gray Tuesday morning. Jennifer came with me for support, and Patricia represented me with calm professionalism. Barbara showed up with her own lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. She sat across the aisle from me, radiating indignation. The judge, an older woman named Judge Harriet Simmons, reviewed the filings and then asked Patricia to present her case. Patricia walked through the timeline methodically, submitting evidence. The original HOA letters, my documentation of being in compliance, the town code enforcement findings, the false business complaint, the false stolen property report, and the police reports I had filed. "Your Honor, this is a clear pattern of escalating harassment," Patricia concluded. "Miss Henderson has abused her position as HOA president to target Mr. Crawford with baseless complaints and false reports. He has a reasonable fear for his safety and reputation." Barbara's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, this is a dispute between neighbors that has been blown out of proportion. Miss Henderson has done nothing but try to enforce community standards. Mr. Crawford has been hostile and uncooperative from the start." Judge Simmons looked at Barbara. "Miss Henderson, did you file a report with the police claiming Mr. Crawford had stolen property?" Barbara hesitated. "I had concerns about tools and equipment I saw at his residence." "Did you have any evidence that these items were stolen?" "I had suspicions." "Suspicions are not evidence." "Did you confirm with his employer that items were missing before filing a police report?" "No, Your Honor." "Did you file a complaint with code enforcement claiming he was running an illegal business?" "Yes, but I believed." "Was he running an illegal business?" Barbara's face was red. The inspector said no, but, "Miss Henderson, these are serious accusations. Filing false reports with law enforcement and town agencies is not only improper, it is potentially criminal. I am granting the temporary restraining order. You are to have no contact with Mr. Crawford, directly or indirectly. You are not to file any complaints or reports about him to any agency unless you have clear, documented evidence of an actual violation. Do you understand, Your Honor? I am the president of the HOA. I have to be able to communicate about community matters. You can communicate through an intermediary if necessary. But you personally are not to contact Mr. Crawford. This order is effective for 1 year, and we will have a follow-up hearing in 6 months to determine if it should be extended. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Barbara said stiffly. As we left the courthouse, Jennifer hugged me. You won. I got a restraining order against my HOA president, I said. I am not sure that is winning. It is better than being harassed, Patricia said, and it is on the record now. If she violates this order, she can be arrested. 2 days after the restraining order was granted, I got a call from Detective Sarah Kowalski from the Brighton Police Department. Mr. Crawford, I am investigating the stolen property report that was filed about you. I have spoken with the reporting party and with your employer. I need to ask you some questions. Of course. Did you ever tell Barbara Henderson that you had employer-owned tools or parts at your residence? No, I have never had that conversation with her. I barely spoke to her before this whole thing started. Did you ever display or show tools or equipment in a way that might have led someone to believe they were stolen? No, I keep my personal tools in my garage. I do not even work on cars at home. Detective Kowalski was quiet for a moment. Mr. Crawford, based on my investigation, I have determined that the stolen property report was filed without any reasonable basis. The reporting party admitted she had no evidence of theft and filed the report based on what she called a feeling something was wrong. That is not sufficient grounds for a police report. So, what happens now? I am referring charges against Barbara Henderson for filing a false police report. The district attorney's office will decide whether to prosecute. You will be contacted if they need you to testify. After that call, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. I had never wanted any of this. I just wanted to shovel my driveway and live my life. The recall election was held on a Saturday in early April. The snow had finally melted, revealing lawns and flower beds that had been buried for months. The retention pond that had caused so much trouble was flowing properly, the HOA having been forced to clear it by the town. Jennifer and I went to vote at the community clubhouse. The turnout was huge, with people lined up out the door. The election was not just about recalling the board anymore. Several residents, including George Martinez and a younger couple named the Patels, were running for the open positions. The results were announced that evening. The recall passed by an overwhelming margin. Barbara, Linda, Robert, and Donna were all removed. The new board members were elected in their places. George Martinez became the new president. His first act was to send a letter to every resident apologizing for the previous board's overreach and promising a new approach focused on community rather than enforcement. I received a personal letter from George a few days later. In it, he apologized for what I had gone through and formally withdrew all fines and violations against me. He also mentioned that the new board was reviewing the bylaws to make them more reasonable and to add checks and balances against future abuses of power. The criminal case against Barbara moved slowly, as these things do. The district attorney decided to prosecute, and Barbara was charged with filing a false police report, a misdemeanor. Her lawyer tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing it was a misunderstanding, but the DA's office held firm. In June, Barbara accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to a reduced charge and was sentenced to community service, a fine, and probation. She was also required to write a formal letter of apology to me, which arrived in the mail one humid afternoon. The letter was stiff and clearly written by her lawyer, but it acknowledged that she had filed reports without proper evidence and apologized for any harm to my reputation. It was not heartfelt, but it was official acknowledgement that I had been right. Jennifer and I read it together on my back porch, drinking iced tea and watching birds at the feeder. You know what is funny? Jennifer said. This all started because she said your snow pile was too big. 3 feet 11 inches, I said. Never forget. Are you glad you fought back? I thought about it. The stress, the anxiety, the time and money spent on lawyers and police reports. But also the changes in Maple Ridge Estates, the new board that actually listened to residents, the removal of a bully from power. Yeah, I said finally. Yeah, I am glad. Nobody should have to live under a tyrant just because they own a home in a particular neighborhood. My revolutionary boyfriend, Jennifer said, kissing my cheek. Life in Maple Ridge Estates improved dramatically under the new board. They simplified the bylaws, reduced the fees, and implemented a system where residents could challenge violations before fines were issued. They also created a community garden in one of the common areas and organized neighborhood events that actually brought people together. I ran into Barbara once, several months after everything was resolved. It was at the grocery store, and we both froze when we saw each other across the produce section. For a moment, I thought she might ignore me or turn away, but instead she walked over. "Kyle," she said stiffly. "Barbara," we stood there awkwardly. Finally, she spoke. "I am moving. I put my house on the market last month." "I am sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I had not wanted to drive her out of her home. I cannot stay here after everything that happened. People look at me like I am a criminal. "You did file false police reports," I said gently. "That is not just people being mean." I know I went too far. I was just so angry that you challenged me, that you did not just follow the rules like everyone else." I was following the rules. My snow pile was under the limit. Barbara looked away. "I know. I measured it wrong the first time. By the time I realized my mistake, I was too proud to admit it, so I changed the justification to aesthetics. And then you measured mine and reported me, and I was humiliated. Everything after that, I was just trying to win, to prove I was right. I lost sight of everything else." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I felt a flicker of sympathy for her, this woman who had let pride and power turn her into someone she probably had not meant to become. "I hope your next neighborhood is better for you," I said. "And I hope you do not become the HOA president there." She gave a bitter laugh. "Not a chance. I am done with HOAs forever." We parted ways, and I never saw her again. Her house sold quickly, and a young family with 2 kids moved in. They were friendly and normal, and their snow piles that next winter were reasonable. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I kept working at Precision Auto, eventually getting a raise after my boss learned about everything I had dealt with. Jennifer and I got engaged that fall, on a beautiful October evening with leaves turning gold and red all around us. We still live in Maple Ridge Estates. The neighborhood is not perfect, but it is ours, and it is better than it was. George Martinez served 2 years as HOA president before stepping down, and the new board continues his reasonable approach. I still shovel my own driveway every winter, and I still make a snow pile at the edge of my property. These days, nobody measures it. Nobody sends threatening letters. Nobody cares because it is just snow, and snow melts, and life goes on. But I kept all the documentation from that winter. I have a folder in my office filing cabinet labeled Snow Pile War. And sometimes, when I am feeling nostalgic or when someone asks me about dealing with difficult people, I pull it out and tell the story. It is a story about standing up to bullies. It is a story about how pride and power can corrupt even something as mundane as a homeowners association. It is a story about documentation and perseverance, and the importance of applying rules fairly. But mostly, it is a story about a 3-foot 11-inch pile of snow that changed everything. The following winter was mild, with only occasional light snowfalls. My snow piles never exceeded 2 feet. But whenever I shoveled my driveway, I thought about that chaotic winter, about Barbara and the restraining order and the recall election. Jennifer and I got married that spring in a small ceremony at a venue outside Maple Ridge. We invited people from the neighborhood, including George Martinez and the Patels and even old Mr. Patterson, who had watched the whole drama unfold from his front window and provided moral support with occasional plates of cookies. At the reception, George gave a toast that included a joke about snow pile measurements, and everyone laughed. It had become neighborhood legend, the story of how Kyle Crawford took down a tyrannical HOA over snow. But what people did not always understand was that it was never really about the snow. It was about dignity and fairness and the right to live in your own home without arbitrary harassment. It was about checking power when power goes unchecked. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if I had just paid that first fine. $250, and I could have avoided all the stress and conflict and legal drama. Would my life have been simpler? Probably. Would it have been better? No. Because Barbara would have continued bullying other residents. The board would have continued their petty tyranny. Nothing would have changed except that I would have learned I could be pushed around, and that is a lesson I am glad I never had to internalize. Jennifer says I am stubborn, and she is right, but there is a difference between stubbornness and having a spine. I chose to stand up, to fight back with facts and documentation and legitimate complaints. I did not get angry and yell. I did not vandalize property or make threats. I measured snow piles and filed proper reports and used the system the way it was supposed to be used. And the system, slowly and frustratingly, worked. That is the real lesson of the snow pile war. The system can work, but only if people are willing to engage with it. Only if people are willing to stand up and say, "This is not right, and I am not going to accept it." Years later, after Jennifer and I had kids, and our house in Maple Ridge was filled with the chaos of family life, our oldest daughter asked me about the framed photo that hung in my office. It was a picture of a snow pile, taken from street level with a measuring tape showing 3 feet 11 inches. "Why do you have a picture of snow on your wall?" she asked, her 7-year-old face scrunched in confusion. "That is the snow pile that taught me to stand up for myself," I told her. "Snow taught you that?" "No, baby. The person who tried to bully me over that snow taught me that. Sometimes people will try to push you around, especially if they have a little bit of power. And when that happens, you have 2 choices. You can let them win, or you can stand up with facts and truth and fight back the right way." What is the right way? Not with fists or yelling, with evidence and patience and using the rules fairly. She thought about that for a moment. "Did you win?" "I did." "Good, bullies should lose." I hugged her, this fierce little person who already understood justice better than some adults. Yes, they should. The snow pile war became family legend, retold at dinners and gatherings. It became shorthand for standing up to unfairness. When my son faced a difficult teacher in middle school who played favorites, we talked about documentation and proper channels. When Jennifer dealt with a difficult manager at the hospital, we talked about building a case with facts rather than emotions. The lessons from that winter extended far beyond HOA disputes. They were lessons about power dynamics, about the importance of evidence, about perseverance in the face of intimidation. And every winter, when the first snow falls and I grab my shovel, I think about Barbara Henderson and that first threatening letter. I think about how close I came to just paying the fine and letting it go. I think about the alternate timeline where I took the path of least resistance. I am glad I did not. I am glad I measured those snow piles. I am glad I filed those reports. I am glad I stood up. Because in the end, it was never about the snow. It was about dignity and principle and the refusal to be bullied. And that is a fight worth having every single time.